into the Hall of Fame Dynasty podcast. It is MLB preview time once again, and we are on part 7 of our MLB previews for 2020. And this time we will be discussing the St. Louis Cardinals, and we do have their owner with Jared tonight. How are you doing tonight, Jared?
John, doing great. Excited about the season almost here, and excited to join you on the podcast tonight.
I know, and I'm surprised how many people I've actually been able to hook up with and be able to get this done and get them to be able to talk about their own teams. When I first started the project, I didn't think it was I'd have the availability from everyone, but it's been great to have everybody on, and I'm excited to have you on to discuss your fourth place Cardinals from last year.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm excited too. I've been listening to all of them. I know we had talked previously, and you weren't sure how many people would listen to other teams, but I've listened to every one so far, really enjoying it. It's just another thing that makes this league great and unique is, we have that ability to hear the voices of all the other owners. Got a good group here.
Yes, we do. And I'll actually have to go back and listen to them as well, try and see if I can pick up on any of my, ticks or certain things that I do. But let's get into your team tonight with your St. Louis Cardinals. You had a great year. You finished with a record of 142, 100 losses, and 10 ties. So obviously 42 games above 500. Very great year for you, but you did finish in fourth place because of the loss to Keith, your obvious rival in the league. I know you have history with Barnes as well, but as you've seen within our leagues, it seems to always be you and Keith in the very tough matchups, and you had a tough one in the playoffs against him in the semifinals last year. Some very close categories, OPS by a separation of 5 100ths, a difference of 4 walks, 1 quality start, 2 saves and holds. Honestly, even though the scoreboard says you lost 10 categories to 2, it really wasn't as bad of a beatdown as you would assume just by looking at the scoreboard.
Yeah, it really came down to those that last day or two, last few games even. It was nip and tuck all the way. He and I go way back, as many in the league know, childhood friends, so we've always been competitive and across all sports. Certainly here in baseball, he's had my number a little bit more recently come playoff time, although I've competed well with him in the regular season, so I'm hoping to take that next step and knock him out in the playoffs and end that streak of his.
I'm sure he's ready to do it, and of course, obviously, he had 2 of the, vaunted Astros on his team, and Altuve and Springer. Does that really affect you at all, like knowing what we know now for 2019? Does it kind of burn you a little bit or no?
Well, it's a mixed bag because another Dynasty league I'm in where I'm the heavy favorite, I've got a couple of the Astros there. I've got Springer and Correa and whatnot. So, I've kind of benefited from both sides of it. So I am interested to see how this whole situation turns out and if it ends up... Now, they cheated, don't get me wrong, but if just the stat aspect, if it ends up being overblown a little bit this year.
Yeah, I could see it. It's really hard to say what they're going to do this year because they're still great baseball players. It's not like you took a AAA team and gave them the technology that the Astros had and ran them out there. They're great baseball players. We know that. So I don't expect them to drop off a whole lot, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did regress. And I completely get that with the thoughts of you're in so many leagues of, well, this player's great for me, but now I'm facing him this week, so you kind of have that yay and nay at the same time with it. You're torn.
Yeah, it's the old blessing and curse of being in multiple leagues, but, hey, we're addicted, so what can we do?
Exactly. All we can do is keep on playing. I mean, probably not the best thing to say when addicted, but it is what it is.
True.
So why don't we get into some of the players you gained this offseason? And I felt like before I set up the document, I felt like your list was going to be a lot shorter, but I didn't realize how active you honestly were. For being in fourth place, you improved your team a good amount. During the offseason, you were able to acquire a decent amount of names that either are bounce backs or prospects, starting with Luis Patino, Joe Musgrove, Travis d'Arnaud, Tom Murphy, and Kyle Seager, along with some other players in Ian Happ, Andrew Miller, Keone Kela, Luis Arias, Yanni Chirinos, and Alex Reyes. Obviously, this was a mix of pickups and trades. The one that I really like for you is probably Joe Musgrove.
Agreed.
Great, easy pickup over the offseason. I didn't realize that you picked him up as early as you did. I think he's going to have a breakout year this year, especially with the pitching coach change, I should say, in Pittsburgh. Out of this decent list of names, which names are you looking forward to seeing either improve or possibly make a bigger impact on your team this year?
I definitely agree with the Musgrove aspect. I was looking at a stat earlier this offseason, and I may be remembering it a little bit incorrectly, but he was one of only about 5 or 6 pitchers last year, even with some struggles throughout the year, to have 3 pitches, with 15% plus swing and strike rate. I mean, the dude was on. And I agree. I think the pitching coach change and everything is going to make a big boost for him as well. Another year in the organization, all those sort of things. But yeah, Musgrove was a good pickup for me. He's a guy that I actually met before with Keith. Actually, we went to an Astros game and we met him after the game.
Oh, wow!
Got an autograph. Yeah, so kind of a little sentimental there. Wanted him on my team, so I snatched him up. But even beyond that, yeah, he's going to be a key part. I think my rotation. He may not be a top line ace, obviously, but in a dynasty league, you've got to have those guys that are just your bread and butter. They just go out there and they pitch, get you some innings, and don't kill you in a lot of other areas. So he's going to be a key part for me there. Long term, I really like grabbing Patino in a trade. I really like his talent. Obviously, I wouldn't think it would pay off this year, but a recent guy, I hope he turns it around. I recently got Alex Reyes. He's, as a Cardinal fan and just a prospect hound, he's been a favorite of mine for years, so I'm hoping he can stay healthy and show off some of that talent. So really my biggest pickups this year, as far as hoping that it helps my team both now and long term, has really been on the pitching side.
I'd agree with that. And Luis Patino may not have an impact in the majors this year, but I could easily see him. If he has a great year, he's going to jump up the prospect charts. I believe he's somewhere around number 50 or 60. I don't know it off the top of my head, but he's in the middle of the pack there.
Right.
Obviously, a lot of potential with him. He's got some command issues, as a lot of young pitchers do. We don't see him very rarely sticking with the high strikeout rate and low walk rate, but if he's able to fix his command and control this year, maybe he jumps up even more.
Agreed.
And I like Ian Happ is a good pickup. He's may get some run in the outfield or even at third base this year for the Cubs if they move Bryant over to the outfield at some point for defensive reasons. And Keona Kela is a good pickup there, especially with Felipe Vasquez out of Pittsburgh for the time being, as I doubt we ever see him really pitch in the majors once again because of his whole legal issues, we'll say.
Yeah, that whole story is just sad. What the things he's done, but yeah, Kela was a good pickup.
Yeah.
He was one of those I was just going through like we all probably do, just kind of skimming through and digging a little deeper sometimes because the projections aren't perfect. Sometimes guys are hiding down in there a few pages down, and found him, so snatched him up. And I agree on Happ as well. Key part for me on that grab there was the versatility, but then also he's still young. The majority of his career hopefully is still before him, obviously. So thought he was well worth the roster spot. See what happens.
Oh, absolutely, especially as a bench spot, and you need some help in your outfield, but we'll get to that later. So why don't we get into your players lost during the offseason? You really didn't lose too many big names. Obviously, we'll start with some of the pitching with Jason Groom, Brad Peacock, Michelle Baez, Jose Quintana, Jahmai Jones, Adam Jones, Roberto Perez, Billy Hamilton, Alex Gordon, and finally pitcher John Gant. Obviously, Adam Jones went over to Japan. He's going to be playing over there, so not really retirement, but still a loss to your fantasy team. That's probably the biggest one out of all of these, just because he's been such a steady force over the years. As he wasn't really flashy over the last few, but he kind of like you were talking with the pitchers, he goes out there, plays every day, and plays as well as he can. So that was probably the biggest one in my eyes as a loss for you. What about you?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, again, I did lose a little bit of pitching depth perhaps with Quintana, or even some bullpen with Baez and prospect and Groom and things of that nature. But all the moves I made as far as guys I lost were things that really made sense. They were either aspects to push a trade over that I made, even if it was involving for another league, or, trimmed a little fat, as they say, whether it be a Jones who's no longer in MLB or just some guys that really weren't worth a roster spot in my eyes at this point. So I think all in all, honestly, there wasn't one huge trade I made this offseason baseball-wise. But when you look at it all between what I lost and what I gained, I think at worst I came out even, but I think I came out a little bit ahead. So the pitching depth, you know how pitchers were always dealing with injuries. Some of the lost pitching depth may come back to bite me, but ultimately some of these guys may have had to been cut anyway with the roster cut down. So I don't feel like any move is going to come back to bite me, but we'll find out.
That's a good point. I mean, you lost some guys. Brad Peacock is one that could be pretty useful this year, as the Astros have a good back into the rotation spot open.
Yep.
But Peacock is likely to stick in the bullpen at this point, it seems. John Gant seemed to have overperformed. The other one that kind of sucks is Billy Hamilton. Obviously, he wasn't great the last few years. He did provide speed for your team, and it sucks to see him kind of fall off the table, but we knew he was a speed-first guy, really didn't have the on-base potential, so really, if he wasn't getting on base, he wasn't useful, especially during the cold streaks.
Yeah, he may be the biggest example of really these last 5 years when I've played fantasy sports for years, but last 5 years I've finally found some groups like this that really enjoy the Dynasty aspect. And then in the 5 years I've really been doing Dynasty baseball, he may be the guy that has lost the most value. I mean, the first draft I did in Dynasty baseball, he was going, top 2-3 rounds because of that speed, and he was getting on base a little bit more, and it all dropping all the way down to, I mean, he's not even draftable right now. I mean, it's insane. And he's still not old. That's the crazy part. It's not like he's 38 years old and you would expect him to not be on a team any longer. So, oh, Billy.
Yeah, actually, I pulled up his stats, and yeah, he had 4 straight seasons of 50 or more steals, with starting in 14.
Yep.
So going from 14 through 2017, here's his totals: 56, 57, 58, and 59.
Yeah.
Obviously, the batting average never really topped 260, but he was just so valuable in those years where he is. I mean, especially if it was roto and head-to-head, he could win you a week on steals alone, and man, he really dropped off quick. Even though he did increase his walk rate over the last couple of years, he just struck out more. Yeah. So it sucks to see him go away like that, because he was electric on the base pads.
Agreed.
So why don't we get to some interesting players that are actually on your team and ready for the season. We'll start with Gleyber Torres, and he's somebody that I'm kind of nervous about going into this year, because, and I've done a deep dive on him a couple of times just because for writing for fake teams obviously has made me look into some certain players, and the way that he had his year last year makes me nervous. He was really great against the Baltimore Orioles. Absolutely just like Babe Ruth like when it came down to it.
Yeah, his stats against the Orioles are insane.
But against the rest of the league, he was very average. He wasn't really anything special. Does that make you nervous at all for 2020, or do you think he's going to be able to kind of balance it out between Baltimore and the rest of the league?
Honestly, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I do feel that he's still young enough. He's still in that reaching his peak level. So I do think he will be able to balance it out some, but at the same time, your point is very valid. I mean, every time last year I'm watching highlights, the Yankees playing the Orioles, and he's going deep every single time. And so it was a fun ride, but yeah, then those weeks they're not playing the Orioles, I wasn't getting as much from him. So again, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. I think he is going to continue to trend up and learn a little bit from that and get a little bit more consistent against the other teams. I just hope that consistency comes as a net positive and not necessarily that he's trending down on Baltimore. I'm hoping that improvement on the other teams nets me an improvement across the board. He's a guy that, even with the struggles against the other teams, you shared a stat the other day, or I believe it was you, about players that went 30, 100, and 100. And he was close on all those, went over 30 homers. He was close on the other two, the runs and the RBI. And he's projected to be pretty close on those three as well. So he's a guy I'm definitely looking to take that next step. and hopefully get to that 30, 100 plateau, which would be a great benefit for me, not only to my team but certainly that infield of mine.
Yeah, and that actually came from Mac. I had seen it, but I didn't share it. But he was the one that did share it to the group.
Right.
And
sorry, Mac.
Mentioning Glaber. So here's his stat line against Baltimore alone. In 75 plate appearances, he hit .394. He was on base at .467 and a slugging of 1.045 for an OPS of 1.512. That is just stupid.
Well,
13 of his, I think, 38 home runs came against Baltimore.
Well, I'll say this: if I remember, I'm not looking at it right now. If I remember the schedule correctly, I play Barnes and the Dodgers week 1, and guess who the Yankees are opening the season against?
Baltimore, I'm assuming.
Exactly.
Oh. I mean, that's ridiculous levels in the few games that they play against them. Obviously, in the same division, they play 17 games, but to put up that kind of numbers is just tough to really repeat, I think. And against the rest of the league, I think he was like a 260, 311, and 450 type guy, so
yeah.
An OPS below 800, and he's going to need to kind of balance that out if he wants to be the top 40 player that a lot of people have him as.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, he was number 1 prospect at one point, so the talent's there. He's just going to have to, whatever he's got to do, he's going to have to balance that out. And, I really would, on a side note, I'd love to see, and maybe you have seen it, I'd love to see where his season against Baltimore ranks, across the board for any player against any one team in a season. I mean, it's got to rank pretty high. I mean, those numbers are just insane.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, regardless of it being a division opponent, no pitching staff has really been that bad either in a single season. And Baltimore, that was a perfect storm for probably one of the best seasons against a team, like you said.
Agreed.
So another guy that had a career year that I definitely did not see coming was Ketel Marte, and he put up one hell of a year after, I mean, not a bad year beforehand, but he was able to break out in 2019 with 32 home runs, 10 stolen bases, and an average close to 330. And I originally wasn't buying into him because it just felt kind of out of nowhere. He's not the biggest guy. He's 6'1", 165. But he hit the ball damn hard last year with a hard hit percentage rate of 40%. And he had a pretty good exit velocity, almost 90 miles per hour. So he was really talented, and it doesn't feel like all luck. But I think he'll regress in the power a little bit, especially if the juice ball goes away. I could see him more as a 25-15 guy. Would you be okay with that if it's only a 300 batting average, or would you feel a little bit let down?
I think ultimately I'd be happy with that because I'm with you. His season kind of came out of the blue for me. I mean, he was another guy. I picked him up after the 2018 season, so before, during the 2019 offseason, I picked him up for $1. One of my best pickups for last year. So I do expect a little regression. He's still young as well, so I mean, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe we haven't seen the best yet, but I ultimately would expect a little bit of regression down. But he came out of nowhere so much that even a little negative regression like that is still going to put him, again, maybe I had too low of expectations, but it's still going to put him ahead of where I thought when I picked him up. I was picking him up, much like we talked about Hap earlier. At that point, I was picking him up for, outfield depth, second base eligibility. It's a nice combo there. So even if he regresses a little bit, I still feel like I'm ahead with him, and he's still young, so he should be a key part of my team for a while.
Yeah, and his expecting batting average for last year was 299, so even if he is around that 299, 300 mark, I think you'd be okay with that. But he did double his launch angle, so it's not just, okay, he hit the same way. He obviously tweaked his swing a little bit. He was able to get a little bit more loft like players are trying to do this year. So maybe we see the power. I wouldn't expect 30 home runs again, but maybe 25 and maybe a couple more steals since he won't obviously be running around the bases in a single trot. So
right, yeah, I could see that. I would be down with that. 25-15. That's a solid year, and I could definitely see that. 'Cause, yeah, I personally am not banking on another 30 homer year. So if you could promise me 25-15 right now, I will sign on the dotted line.
I bet most players probably would. Now,
Yeah.
onto the harder side of your team, which was we kind of discussed before the podcast yesterday when we tried to record originally, was your pitching. It's not bad, but it's very schizophrenic at this point, I would probably say.
Yeah.
And one of those players that headlines it is Noah Syndergaard, a guy that everyone still highly regards, and it's not without reason, but he had a very odd 2019 season. Obviously, he's dealt with little injuries here and there over the last few years, but he had 202 strikeouts last year, an ERA over 4, but he had decent command. Are you excited? Are you more nervous going into 2020 with Noah Syndergaard?
I'm excited. I mean, last year, really, he summed up, honestly, how I felt about my entire pitching staff last year. Was everyone was just falling flat on their face. I mean, whether it be injuries or just poor performance. Just about all my big name pitchers regressed. Syndergaard, Snell, Darvish struggled. All those guys. Last year Thor was, the Thor from Thor Ragnarok. The one with the eye patch. He didn't have both eyes. It seemed at times. But I am excited. I kind of view it, and maybe this will prove to be just more me hoping against hope, but I kind of view last year, at least at the stage he is in his career, that and a lot of those stats there should kind of show his floor a little bit. He's still got the upside, maybe not the upside that maybe we thought a few years ago to be the number one fantasy pitcher, but does he still have the upside to be a fantasy number one? I think so. And so he's going to be a key for me, my pitching staff obviously, but my team as a whole. He's going to have to get back to being, the thunder and lightning Thor that everyone feared rather than the eye patch one from last year.
I agree, and the problem that's been with him is that the strikeout percentage has just dropped each of the last few years, except for 2018 into 2019. It stayed about the same, but he's got great pitches, he's got the ability and some nasty stuff, but it just hasn't all clicked. And over the last few years, it's kind of been more of a problem with the home runs, especially last year, which was a problem for a lot of people, not just Thor.
Right.
We saw home runs just insane around the league when you have two teams hitting 300 bombs, no problem.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's something different, but the command is still there. That really has changed a little bit, but not to scary levels. Only 2 walks per 9. And it's just, he's been very mediocre in the strikeout department compared to what we thought he was going to be. So
yeah.
He's got the underlying peripherals to support that he could be better. It's just whether or not it actually happens in game.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me it's a lot of the peripherals are there, the talent's there. It's just been that little bit of that it factor. I mean, he's in a lot of regards, and this kind of goes to what you're saying about maybe some of the strikeout numbers not being what we expected or what he showed earlier on in his career. Last year especially, and you said it with the home runs, he at times can be dominant, but then the other times, for a guy with his stuff, he's way too hittable. And that's something he's going to have to figure out. He's going to have to figure out how to mix those pitches better or whatever he's got to do. But he's just, in my opinion, last year especially, he was just too hittable for a guy with the stuff that he has.
Yeah, and I don't know if that shoulder injury from a couple of years ago maybe affected him, but it's sad to see him not reach that potential. But that happens to a lot of pitchers we unfortunately see. Now, one that we've seen the potential and the ceiling, but also a very terrible floor, is Yu Darvish. And that first half of last year was terrible, and I'm sure part of it was from the Houston Astros still affecting him, and he even seemed like it mentally in 2018 when the Cubs originally signed him. But man, that second half last year was to behold, because while he struggled with his command in the first half, he had an ERA close to, actually, sorry, that's at home. Where's the first half? There it is. He had an ERA close, just over 5, but in the second half, he fixed everything. He was able to get his ERA below 3 for the second half, and he struck out 118 batters to 7 walks.
Yeah.
Which that's video game numbers right there. I'm just going to pound the zone on rookie. Nobody's going to touch me. So, do you think he's more of the second half at this point, or is he somewhere in between those two, maybe like a 3.8 type pitcher?
I think ultimately it's a little bit in between, but shading more toward that second half. I mean, the dude is incredibly talented. Just one of the greatest pitchers of this generation right now. Even though he's a little older, than some of the other guys. He's 33, 32, 33.
33.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think 118 to 7 K walk and 81 innings and a .81 WHIP are going to be his all the time, but I definitely don't think he's as bad as his first half. So, 75-25, something around there. 75% is kind of that second half of him with a little bit of the 25% first half mixed in, kind of that. So I do expect him to be better this entire year, which is going to be a big boost for me because, if he would have been pitching that like the second half, or even if it wasn't quite that strong during the first half, I would have gotten off to a better start. And who knows, it could have played into my playoff seeding. Who knows what could have happened. But I definitely am encouraged by that second half. And, he may be, I don't want to overstate it, but he may be the key to my pitching staff this year. If he can pitch like that, that's going to give me a huge boost.
I agree with you there, and the hardest part with him is he's always been a guy where he'll get through 6 innings great, and then he just has a meltdown every once in a while where something gets away from him. And even back when in his Texas days, he was known for having those weird mental lapses of one thing gets to him and he kind of melts down from there.
Yeah.
But maybe as a veteran now, he's able to get past it, and it's hard to tell because we know he was still struggling from supposedly quote unquote tipping his pitches in the World Series in 2017, and that really led into it, and he even admitted it. And it'll be interesting to see what 2020 brings for him because he is a guy that he has really, honestly, most places will list him as 5 pitches, but he really has 15 because he throws a fastball that can be anywhere from 91 to 95
right,
with different movement on it. So it's always tough to square him up when he's on.
Yeah, true. And you may have mentioned this when we were talking a little bit earlier, but, besides that Astros aspect that you mentioned, he was also dealing with the triceps injury going into last year, which played a role too. He's a lot healthier this spring, so I don't know. I think just everything is trending in the right direction for Darvish. Obviously, he should have a pretty solid team behind him to hopefully boost him up, get him some better stats there, get him some wins, and also though he controls the quality start aspect. So again, I'm just hoping that we see that strong Darvish, the Darvish that I kind of, from a fantasy perspective, kind of fell in love with a couple years ago. Just so fun to watch.
Now, one last guy that hasn't been able to stay healthy, and it's really not arm injuries that have kept him off the mound, is Kenley Jansen with, obviously, his heart issues that he's had.
Right.
Just hasn't looked like the same guy over the last 2 years. Very hittable. The walks have gone up. Are you worried about him? Obviously, he's still on a great team, has that closer's role without anyone really pushing him to move away from it, but I mean, we know relievers are very volatile. Is Jansen scary to you in any aspect?
Yeah, he is. He's one of the guys that I am concerned about. He's a guy I do own in multiple leagues. This one obviously being one of them. The signs last year or two have been pretty concerning, trending down in just about every area. I mean, last year was brutal in his compared to his norm. He's really in that aspect for a pitcher in general, but relief pitcher specifically, where it's, he's either going to continue to fade away and be pretty useless from a fantasy perspective, or can he reinvent himself? And I'm not saying he's going to be or is or will be a Mariano Rivera, but can he reinvent himself a little bit and be that steady force throughout the rest of his career? I think this year is a make or break year for him as far as being a closer, or even just being someone that's viewed as a rock solid relief pitcher in general. I mean, he's got some things. I know he's been working on a few things this off season, trying to incorporate some things, refine his cutter a little bit. So he's a guy again, my bullpen, both here and in another league, I have him where I'm going to be, every time I can, I'm going to be trying to watch when he's on the mound, because I've got to see. I'm not a professional scout by any means, but I've got to see if I see some signs of him turning it back around, or we're going to keep trending down. So yeah, he's definitely one I'm concerned about.
And the good thing is he has that job. That's not going anywhere for him. But I mean, the walks have trended up a little bit. The strikeouts have they improved last year compared to 2018. But like you said, we don't know which way he's going to go. But you do have a guy in your farm that may supplant him on your team at least, and that's Andres Munoz.
Yeah.
Somebody that you picked up last year. Very impressive fastball for the San Diego Padres, and he may not have had the cleanest 2019, obviously with an ERA close to 4, but he had more than a K per inning, and he's only 21 years old at this point. Obviously, relief pitchers, we usually don't see them that young, and we've had somebody like Edwin Diaz who ended up becoming awesome. We've also seen AJ Minter over the last 2 years not live up to what his hype was. I think Munoz is exciting, but once again, it's a relief pitcher, and he's obviously not going to make or break your team, but I think he's an interesting arm to watch on your team for sure.
Yeah, he is. He's one of those guys, that since I've been keeping up with him, he's basically from the beginning been considered a relief pitcher prospect, a closer in waiting, if you will, where usually that's not what we hear. It's usually guys come up as starters, they fail as a starter, then they go to the bullpen, got good stuff, they become a closer. He's basically been viewed as an elite closer potentially in the future. One thing that San Diego team, both on the MLB team and in the minors, has got a lot of talented pitching on the relief side. So, it's by no means a guaranteed future closer role for him, but he's definitely got the stuff. He's got a closer profile for sure with his mix of stuff. So he's a guy that I was unable to land in any of my other leagues, so I wanted to have him here. I wanted to have a piece of him. Us fantasy nuts understand that, trying to have a piece of someone somewhere. So he was a guy I was very excited about. He's projected to have some run this year, but ultimately I don't expect him to play a huge role on my team this year. I'm looking more to next year and beyond if he can continue to trend in the right direction.
And it does kind of hurt him this year with the Padres getting Emilio Pagan from the Rays. Yep. Obviously, he's probably going to take over the 8th inning or maybe take over the closer's role with if Kirby Yates were to get dealt at his, I think, 34, 35-year-old season. But obviously, Munoz has the potential, and I actually think we've seen more relief prospects over the last few years. Obviously, like I mentioned, AJ Minter for the Braves, Andres Munoz for the Padres, and then even Zach Birdy for the White Sox. He was drafted as the next closer for them, and I feel like it's just because these guys have electric stuff. They're never going to be a starter.
Right.
So maybe it's just kind of in the cards for him, and you need a good closer nowadays.
Yeah, and the game's changing. The way the scouting's working. I mean, even just the way we're able to get the information. I mean, I mentioned earlier, really got into the Dynasty aspect 5 years ago, and you can attest to this as well, that, I mean, just the amount of information on prospects and things like that has it's just blown up over the last 5 years. I mean, there's so many different ways to look at this. So I do think it is going to help, as crazy as it sounds, it is going to help some of these guys that maybe have more of a reliever profile, maybe make a name for themselves more from the beginning, rather than it being, hey, I'm going to go to the bullpen because I failed as a starter. So I like the way that's trending. I love prospects, and having a little bit more relief prospects is just another fun thing to tackle. Although it may be the toughest one to land, but if you land one, it's going to be all that more exciting.
Oh yeah, and especially if one doesn't work, you just toss them out and grab another one, because Lord knows there's 6 guys in every bullpen, or even at least 3 that could become a closer within a few days.
Exactly.
Now, somebody that I'm sure is going to be an everyday player for you very soon, and I'm sure you're very excited, and that is Luis Robert, the headliner of your farm at this point. Obviously, you've got some other guys like Marco Luciano, Robert Poisson, and Julio Rodriguez, but we will see the biggest impact for 2020 from the White Sox, Luis Robert, center fielder, and he's been crushing spring training. I'm sure it's got you excited. I'm sure it's got you hyped up. And they have him projected for a 25-20 type season. If I can actually, they actually have him at, let's see, 29 home runs and 20 steals with a 262 average. That, I feel like he's going to start out the season hot, and we may see him kind of crash down in the second half of the year because of the fact that even a lot of scouts that I've talked to, a lot of guys that I've connected with, they say he looks great, he's got the bat speed, but it looks like he's guessing on pitches, and that works down in the minors, but at the majors you get guys like Kershaw and Darvish and Scherzer that will come at you with some nasty stuff, and especially facing Clevenger and Bieber in that same division from the Indians, he's going to get his due pretty early on against some good division opponents. Now, are you nervous about him, or what do you expect out of him this year?
Oh, I definitely expect there's going to be some struggles, but I'm setting all that aside. I am so excited. He is one of my current infatuations. I'm infatuated with him. He's someone I've had my eye on for several years. So he's been someone I've just held on to. Excited to have him. He's going to be a huge boost for me. I mean, just from, I mentioned earlier, I didn't make, a big, huge offseason trade this year. I mean, I certainly tried. Most of my trades tended to come in the other sports. So, but it was always nice. Back in my mind, I knew even as a trade or two that I was working on kind of fell through, that I had him on the way. And, even at that point, he hadn't signed that extension yet. So I was looking more at, okay, maybe I'll have him in May or June, not from the beginning of the season. So that was a nice boost for that to happen. Yeah, I'm excited. He's going to have his struggles like all young players do, but I mean, his tools are so tantalizing. He's an exciting player to watch, and yeah, I'm pretty giddy about him. I'm trying to control myself because we've already went quite a while, and I don't want us to have to go an hour, but he's someone I'm super excited to watch this year, and I've grown up a Cardinal fan, as I've said, but this playing fantasy these last few years has really allowed me, I think, as it does for all of us, to really watch other teams with more interest than maybe what we would have in general. And one of my favorite teams to watch right now, because they're so loaded with young talent, both on the majors and in the minors, is the White Sox. I mean, Robert Jimenez and Moncada and all these guys, I mean, just such talent. They're so fun to watch, and that's such a loaded lineup.
It is, and it's the fact that he may bat 8th or 9th this year is
exactly
really stupid, but really good. And he's going to be a good boost to your outfield with guys like Jose Martinez and Justin Upton, and Nomar Mazara is still there, so he's going to bring a big boost there. And funny enough, he was either going to sign with the Cardinals or the White Sox, so you kind of had a piece of it either way.
Yeah, that's true.
So why don't we get into the stats of your team? When I was doing this, I really didn't see too many weaknesses. So let's start with that, and we'll kind of work backwards here, just because your team we're obviously getting into the stronger teams, the top of the pack. So with your weaknesses, the biggest ones that I saw for you is stolen bases and whip for your pitching staff. Obviously, you've got guys that can toss in a steal here, a steal there. No one on your team, the only guy that actually is projected or had 0 steals last year was Nelson Cruz, but he's still projected 1 for the season. No one in your lineup is a 0 speed guy, according to Fantrax at least. And it's good, but at the same time, you really don't have anyone that can win you a week in terms of steals, especially after losing Billy Hamilton. Are you worried about that or no?
Worried, yeah. It wasn't something I planned on. I'm the type, I don't purposely try to go around punting categories. So if someone was to look at my team for the first time, they'd immediately think that was my strategy, was to punt stolen bases, and it wasn't. Just kind of worked out that way. So yeah, it's going to be something that I'm probably, the way it looks right now, would probably very rarely win. So that's definitely something I'm going to have to keep an eye on, whether it be a move throughout the year on the wire or even in a trade. For me personally, I might need to boost the trade value of someone I'm going after that maybe could boost me in steals. I imagine even with some of the projections, I'm going to have a few guys that may steal more than Fantrax is saying. But on the flip side, some of my guys that shows 4 may get none. So it's definitely in my opinion, the weakest category. One that I'm going to kind of watch the first few weeks, see how it goes, and then see, is it going to make sense to make a move, or am I so far behind the 8 ball that I just need to forget it and move on and strengthen myself in other areas?
Mm-hmm. And the other one is whip. We kind of talked about that earlier. It could be you could be league average. It could be a weakness for you. It really all depends on how your pitching shakes out. You've got some guys that are really up there with Hansel Robles and Andrew Miller and Marco Gonzalez projection wise, but we never know how their season actually shakes out, and that's why they play the games.
Yeah, one of my positives, the way I'm viewing it right now on the whip is, some of the guys you just mentioned there, with projected high whips. Those are guys that, I'm glad to have them on my team right now, don't get me wrong, but they're not make or break guys to where if they bombed, I move on, and go another direction. And then on the flip side, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of my higher end guys, both bullpen and starters, all had down years last year. So I'm hoping for some positive regression there as well. So it still is not going to be my strongest point. I'm not trying to say that, but I do have some hope that either between some better seasons from some of my guys, maybe some good pickups from the wire, and just generally some good luck with how I kind of mix and match, that I'll be more competitive in whip than maybe the projections show.
I do think that it won't take a lot for you to move from a weakness to league average with whip, especially with the rest of the categories that you have at league average with runs, OPS, quality starts, walks, Ks, and ERA. Your pitching staff didn't have the highest ceiling last year, but obviously you've got a good floor. Guys like Noah Syndergaard, Blake Snell are able to provide that floor with a good ceiling and room to grow on top of last year. But at least your offense, too, does provide a good floor in runs and OPS. You don't have a bunch of 900 or 890 type guys, but you have guys that are up there, 867, 866, that are able to slug, they're able to get on base, and if they do have a career year or return to form, they're able to carry you. And I think OPS, you are league average bordering on strength there for your offensive side. Is there anything here that really sticks out to you that you want to talk about, or?
No, I agree on the OPS aspect. Power stats.
You don't really have anyone that kills you in OPS.
Right.
Your lowest one really is a 763, and that's about league average and maybe a little bit above. So honestly, it's a strength. It's a strength to league average, but based on fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. No, on the hitting side, again, like you said, I may not have a lot of guys right now that are projected to, win a league, so to speak, but. I think it's kind of that, the sum of the parts is going to be pretty strong for me when it's all said and done. The power's there, obviously, with the home runs. Average, I do have some guys with some low projected average, and gosh, we know how average can be. Gosh, such a coin flip sometimes. So, much like the whip and everything like that on the pitching side, average is one that I'm going to be watching. And you get these guys with these hot weeks, hitting 600 and looking good, and then the next week they couldn't get on base to save their life. So it can humble you in a hurry. But I feel I would like to add. To be honest with you, I'd like to add another big impact bat at some point during the season as we get in and I see what my needs are. Maybe some other teams decide they're going to sell. So for anyone listening to this, I will be in the market. I plan to be in the market. If all things go according to plan, I'll definitely be in the market to add a bat. And obviously, we all are always looking to add pitching. That's the name of the game in baseball. Never going to have too much of that. So, no, I'm excited. I think the hitting side's got good, strong floor with enough upside throughout that I shouldn't be out of too many games this year.
Right, and honestly, for your strengths, it comes down to home runs, RBI, average, and save plus holds. You've got a good pitching staff, and they've got their secure roles. But the biggest strength to your team is the offense, and a combination you don't really see often is power and average
Yeah.
together. The fact that you have plenty of guys that are projected for 30 plus home runs, and four of them are projected to be better than league positive, and Blackman, Devers, Freeman, and Torres all above the 270-ish mark,
Right.
which is considered league average. So you've got guys that can slug and hit for a good average, and like you said, average can be a coin flip, but it's good to have a good baseline as well with the power.
Yeah, and that was something even you may not be able to tell it from any this off season's pickups, but that's something as I've over the last few years have been making pickups. I've kind of been looking at that the average as a good tiebreaker, trying to just raise and strengthen that floor on average best I can. And I do think it does show this year that as you said, it does project to be one of my strengths. And then I mean, this day and age, if you don't have home runs as a strength, you're probably doing it wrong because they're hitting so many of them these days. It's kind of hard not to have it as a strength. But I do think, even joking aside, I do have a good, strong base there.
Yeah, you do. And now, because you have such a strong base, you've got a good floor, but you've got that great ceiling. Where do you see your team going this year? I've got you as a playoff-bound team. I think you may be bounced in the second round depending on matchups and who you face. And a lot of it's going to come down to whether it's Keith or myself or Kevin. All depends on how it plays out. And we all know that, I mean, one week you may have the hottest team, and next week everyone goes cold. And it is the most brutal thing. But obviously, I've got you playoff bound at this point. Where do you see yourself? Obviously, you're hoping to get a championship, but what do you see as positive performance for your team?
Yeah, I think this is going to be year 3 for us on the baseball side. Lost,
and hopefully we don't have a 3-time champion.
Yeah, exactly. We got to make a pact. As much as I love my dear friend, we got to all make a pact that we don't have a three-peat. First year I lost to Keith in the championship. Last year I lost in the semis. So I've made it to the Final Four, if you will. It's March, so talk a little March Madness, I guess.
Exactly.
I've made the Final Four both years, so. For me, that's got to be the 4. Anything less than at least getting to the semis, I'm going to view as a disappointment. Obviously, I'm shooting for the championship. You're right. A lot of it is going to come down to matchups. Let's be honest. In a one-week setting, luck, I mean, that plays a part. I know you've experienced being on the bad end of luck when you were the favorite. I have as well in other leagues. If you play it long enough, you're going to find yourself on both the good and the positive end of luck. So you never know what's going to happen there. But realistically speaking, even with obviously the league dynamic changing, getting Sean back, which I'm super excited about. It's going to be as competitive as ever. But for me, anything less than the semis would be a disappointment. But to truly win that championship, I mean, I do think besides needing my pitching to step back up this year, needing some of my young bats to continue to progress forward, I realistically would think. Honestly, that another player or two away from going from, hey, maybe I can get lucky in the semis and win the championship, to being a true, hey, I'm there to win it sort of contender. So that's what I'm going to be looking for and shopping for this year.
Right, and it's more of that wishy of, okay, maybe everything can play right too. You feel more confident. You feel like you have it all. Not all locked in, but you are right there with everyone else.
Right.
And Pagoda actually has you as one of those top teams, and you obviously were breaking into our top teams, and you have, according to Pagoda for this year, the 3rd best offense in our league, according to WAR, and you have the 5th best pitching staff, which, honestly, the pitching staffs are not far apart. A lot of it is more the floor versus ceiling and just how well is everyone projected, but you're right there middle of the pack with pitching, and with a little bit of luck, we know what happens with pitching. You can get these breakout years from guys. Sonny Gray finally returned to form exactly, and he's a great example of that, even though you don't have him, but you never know who's going to have what, especially team dynamics changing, defenses behind him.
Yep.
And Pagoda just shows that you've got the good floor, you've got that ceiling as well, and I'm excited to watch your team. It has so many storylines between Charlie Blackmon, him getting older and possibly regressing. Obviously, Paul Goldschmidt is another guy. You have Nomar Mazara in a new scenery. Maybe that changes for him. Ian Happ getting some playing time. Your team is one of the most exciting in terms of storylines, and I feel like we'll have plenty of that for you this year.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's just gonna be an exciting season across the board. I mean, I think, I know we're talking baseball, and I've alluded to other leagues a few times, but I think across the board, and maybe others would disagree, but I think the baseball league out of this great four-sport dynasty has the potential, if not already, to be the most competitive across the board of all four sports. And part of that's just the nature of baseball. It's a long season, a lot of players, so many stats that you can grab out even off the waiver wire. But I don't know, it just seems across the board that the baseball league, especially this year, should be as competitive as any of the sports have been any of the years we've been doing this.
I agree with that, and it's especially, football, you have teams that get just destroyed by injuries, or, obviously pickups don't go their way, but definitely baseball is the one where breakouts are easier to kind of buy into, or at least you pick the guy up for a week and he just continues to play well and you hold on to him. Max Muncy's a guy like that for the Rockies that Keith obviously picked him up and held him, and especially with pitching, you never know what happens.
Yeah, so. Well, as we alluded to earlier, that was Marte for me last year. I picked him up off season, looking for depth, and now he's a key part of my team. So, again, that's just the beauty of sports in general, certainly fantasy, that you just never know, and that's why you just keep plugging away, and, sometimes the ball rolls your way and you win a championship.
Exactly. So, we've covered your team pretty well. And if you have anything else to say about your team, if there's anything else you want to kind of plug for it, go ahead, and I'll let you have the last minute or so.
No, I appreciate you doing this, doing these previews and getting us on, and just for all the behind-the-scenes work for the leagues. And so I'm looking forward to beating Barnes in week 1. So hopefully he listens to this. I look forward to beating him in this league just like I do in every other league we play in. And then, of course, I got to take down Keith. So, there's going to be a lot of smack talk this year, which is part of the fun. Shout out to all the great guys of this league. Usually we're chatting on Slack. We don't ever really get to see each other necessarily. But I really, really enjoy being in league with you all. But just know that makes me want to beat you all the more.
Hey, that's exactly what this is all about, and it's especially with Sean. I expect the smack talk to definitely increase this year compared to last year, because we all know how he is during baseball season. Yeah,
that will increase, as we've already seen the pictures of women that he posts. So that's good.
That's a good point.
That's going to increase as well, I'm sure, this year.
So I'm excited for this season. We've only got a couple more to record, and I can't wait to see what happens. Sean's obviously, we are recording this before I get to Sean, so I can't wait to see what his podcast holds. He's promised some really good stuff. So
I bet. I'm going to look forward to that.
I can't wait to see what happens. Yes, but sir. I want to thank you for coming on, Jared, and I'm ready for the season. I cannot wait till spring training ends and we get to baseball that actually matters.
I agree. Good luck, everyone.
Have a good night, Jared.
You too, brother.